Welcome guys. Welcome to this playlist on Python questions. And in this playlist, we will be covering Python questions which are asked frequently in the interviews. And regarding me, I'm having more than 8 years of experience in Python, and I have faced 150 plus interviews. And in this playlist, I will be covering some questions which are frequently asked, and moreover, which have some concepts behind that. So we will get to learn some concept in each and every question. So let's start with today's video. So today we will be discussing about questions on equality versus identity operator. So basically what equality operator do is that it will checks for the value of two different variables. And if the value is same for both the variables, then it will give us true as the output. And if the value is different for both the variables, then it will return false. Okay. Now coming to identity operator. So what it do is that it checks for the like whether two variables are referring to the same object or not. If they are referring to same object, then it will return true. And if they are referring to different objects, then it will return false. So come, let's understand this with an example. So suppose we have a list L1, which is having three values, 1, 2, and 3. Then we have second list, say L2, which is having again the same values, 1, 2, and 3. Now the question comes like if we use the equality operator and we say like is L1 equal to L2, and the second question comes is that L1 is L2, where we are using identity operator and we are trying to figure out like whether both these variables are referring to the same object or not. So in this guys, this equality operator is a bit straightforward since we can simply see the values and we can decide whether it will return true or false. So as we can see from this question, like L1 is having the values 1, 2, and 3, and here the L2 is also having the values 1, 2, and 3, as we can see from here. So both these values are same, so we can safely say that it will return true in this case, right? But when we are using this identity operator, this is not so straightforward, and we have to figure out like whether this will return true or this will return false. Or in other words, if we say like whether L1 and L2 they are both pointing to the same object, or this L1 and L2 they are pointing to different objects. Okay. So to understand this, we have to understand the concept or how is it implemented in Python. So we'll come to that in a while. So we just put a question mark over here and let's see another examples that you may be asked in the interview. So for this concept only, this is one question that is being asked in the interview. Then coming to, let's say this is question number one, and then the interview may ask you follow-up questions on the same, right? Just to check like whether the candidate has the knowledge about the concept or full knowledge about the things, right? So coming to question two, which can be a follow-up question of the same, where the interviewer can ask whether L1 0 will be equal to L2 0 or L1 0 is L2 0. Okay. Now again, in this case also this L1 0 will be 1 since we can see 1 is present at the 0th index of L1. If we say these are the index 0, 1, 2, then 1 is present at the 0th index of L1. Similarly, at the 0th index of L2 also we have the same value 1, as we can see over here, right? So this will be equivalent to 1 equal to 1, which will return true, since the values are same in both the variables, right? Again, for this case, we will see in a while. So we are not doing it right away. Then comes the third case. Okay. This may be a follow-up case of the same, or this may be asked as a individual question in the interview. So suppose we have one string with the value apple, and we have second string with the same value apple. And now if we are being asked like whether S1 will be equal to S2 or S1 is S2. Okay. So in this case, we know like S1 is equal to apple and S2 is also equal to apple. So we can see like apple equal to apple, right? Values are same for both the cases. So in this case, it will return true, right? Simple. And in this case, we will discuss the concept behind this, like how the things will be decided by Python in this case. So we will come to this later. Okay. And one more thing, guys, if the value is different, like suppose if we say S instead of apple, if S2 would have been this having the values banana. Okay. Then in this case, if we compare over here, then it will become apple equal to banana, which won't be true. So it will return false. Okay. Okay, guys. So from this discussion, we are clear about this equality operator, but we are yet to see like how identity operator works, right? Okay. So coming to identity operator, let's start with the first example. So in first example, we were saying like if L1 if L1 is equal to 1, 2, 3 and L2 is equal to 1, 2, 3 again. So we have to tell whether this, I'm not taking the this equality operator in consideration now, since we have already discussed. Now I am just focusing only on the identity operator. Okay. Now we have to say like what will be returned in this case, whether it will be true or false. So either one of these value will be the output of this scenario. Okay. So for this, first we will understand like how it works in the background. Okay. So if L1 and L2, if they both are referring to same object, right? If they both are referring to same object, then we can say that identity operator will return true. This we have discussed. And if they both are referring to different objects, then we know that the value which will be returned is okay. Now this we understood, like if we come to know like whether they are referring to same object or the different object, then we can safely say whether that it will return true or false. Now in the backend, this just to know this particular thing, we will see like what all scenarios are there which Python have, right? One scenario is that Python will create only one object having these three values if it has to be this first case. And for the second case, it's like it will create two different objects with the same values. And over here, this L1 will refer to this object and L2 will refer to this object. While in this case, it is this Python is creating only one object and both L1 as well as L2, they are referring to the same object, right? Okay. But now as we know, like over here L1 needs this value 1, 2, 3, and L2 also needs this value 1, 2, 3. But suppose after some time, if L2 have some requirement where it needs an additional value, say 4, and it has to add this value to the list. So the list will become 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So L2 is happy over here since the list is now as per the requirement of L2. But L1 only requires a list containing 3 elements. So now L1 is not happy, and this will results in a conflict between L1 and L2, right? So what Python does, Python doesn't want any conflict between any two variables or any two user, right? So what it will do, instead of this scenario, it won't take this scenario. Instead, it will consider this scenario in this case, where it will create two lists, two different lists or two different objects, and it will assign one object to one variable and the another object to another variable. Okay. So now in this case, even if L2 has a requirement where it has to change its list or add some element like 4, which we have seen in this case. So the list which is assigned to L2 or the object, it will be modified. It will become this, and L2 will start using this. So L2 is happy in this case, and since L1 is referring to an object which is having, it is altogether a different object than this one. So in this case also L2 will be having only 3 elements as per its requirement, and L1 will also be happy in this case. So guys, there is one thing which we can conclude from this discussion is that if we have some object which is mutable object which can change with time or with different requirements, then Python will prefer to have different objects instead of having a one object, like as we have seen in this case, right? So what it means, like in the question, if we see like if a variable is pointing to an mutable object, and since mutable object can change with time, so we can say like Python will adopt the second strategy, and it will create two different objects. And if it is creating two different objects, then from this discussion we can say that identity operator will return false. So in this case, now we understood that identity operator will return false. Okay. Now there is one more scenario in this case. Coming to that scenario, suppose, so I'm just taking the third case first. Since second question that we have discussed, that is very similar to the third question. So I'm just moving to the third question first. So suppose we have two string object, and the first string object we have one s1 variable which is referred to this string apple, and then we have another variable s2 which is also referring to a string which is having the same value apple. Okay. Now, if we say like if S1 is S2, so whether this will be true or false. Okay. Okay. So let's understand how it will work in this case. Again, identity operator will work in this way. Like if we have same object, or like if S1 and S2 both are referring to same object, then it will return true. And if S1 and S2 they both are referring to different objects, then we will return false. In this case also, Python has two options, right? Option 1, option 2. So option 1 is that Python will create only one object, one string object with the value apple. This is for the first case. If we are considering that if both the S1 and S2, they are referring to same object. Okay. And second case is that Python is creating two different string objects with the same value apple. And here S1 will be referring to the first object and S2 will be referring to second object. Okay. So now similar to previous case, we will try to understand, can we change this, like with time, what will happen with this object? So suppose if tomorrow S2 has a requirement where it need to add something to this particular string. Suppose it has to add bar in this. Okay, apple plus bar. So this will result in a new string which is known as apple bar. Okay. So guys, over here, this is not the same string which is modified over here. No, this is a altogether different string. This is a string one. This is a string two. These are two different strings, and these two strings are saved at different places in the memory also. Suppose string one is saved over here, then string two might be present at some other place. So, like in this case, if we see S2 has modified the string and created a new string. So this S2 is pointing to this and S1 is pointing to this, which is still having the same value as F1. Okay. So now in this case, we have seen like this string can never be modified. And if this string is not modified, then in this case, even if some variable is modifying the string to create a new string with some other values, this variable is still happy because it needs this value as per its requirement and still it is having the same value, right? So in this case, this is happy, this is happy. So what Python do? Python try to optimize its resources and will stick with the first case. So there is no need for the second case in this scenario. Okay. So from this, what we can conclude that if the object that we are talking about in the question, if that is immutable object, okay, like a string or maybe integer. So in this case, if it is immutable, then we don't require the second object. It is only one object that Python will create, and whatever variable wants this value, like suppose tomorrow we have S3 or S4 new variables which needs this particular value, it will point all those variables to the same value. So in this case, we only require a single object since we cannot mutate this object. So even if some new object tries to modify something, it will create its another object like we have seen in this case instead of modifying the existing object. So all the other variables which are referring to this particular object, they won't be having any effect. So in this case, we can have, in case of immutable objects, we can have only one single object and all the variables can refer to the same object. And over here, we have seen like if we have only one object, single object to which the variables are referring, then this identity operator will return true. Okay, good enough. Now coming to question number two that we have left previously, right? This was question number three. So in question number two, we were asking like L1 0 equal is L2 0. And we have seen L1 0 is 1, 1 is 1, and L2 0 is also 1 in that case. So the question will come to this stage, 1 is 1. Now again, as we have seen for the string, this integer value is also immutable. And since it cannot be mutated by or changed by any variable, so we can just go with the same scenario. See, this is also following the same use case that we have discussed over here, right? Because if it creates if some variable want to modify this value, like 1 plus 1, it want to add 1 to this value, then it will become 2, which is altogether different value. 1 is not equal to 2. So again, this is also following the same case. So we can safely say, like, if the object that we are talking about, if that is immutable, then we can have only one copy and all the variables can refer to the same copy of the object, and hence the identity operator will always return true in this case. Okay. Okay, guys, now let's summarize what we have seen in this video. So we will create a summary. First, we have seen this equality operator. And equality operator, we know that it compares the value of both the variables, and if the value is same, then it will return true. And if the value of both the variables it is different, then it will return false. Okay. This we can easily figure out by looking at the value of both the variables that we have in the question. Now, second, coming to the identity operator. So it will look whether it is the same object or single copy of the object that both the variables are referring to. If it is the same object or the single copy of a object, then it will return true. And if it is different copy of the objects or two different objects that those variables are referring to, then it will return false. And for figuring out like whether it will be the same object or it will be a different object, we have seen like if it is immutable object that we are talking about in the question, then it will be the same copy. It is only single copy that Python will create. So it will be the same object that both the variables will refer. So in this case, it will always return true. And in this case, if we have mutable object that we are talking about in the question, then we have to create different copies because same copy usage may create conflict between the two variables. So in this case, we will have different objects. So in this case, it will return false. So over here also, guys, now it has become as simple as the equality operator. Here also, we'll just look if this is a immutable object that is being referred to by both the variables, then it is the same object, same copy that they will refer, and it will return. And if it is mutable object, if it is immutable object, then it will return true. And if it is mutable object, then it may vary. So Python will create two different copies just to avoid any conflict, and it will return false. Okay. So this is our first question about equality and identity operator. We will continue with similar questions in further in the series. So guys, if you like this video, then please do like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Thank you.